finish it
You have
later.
it off.
I'll finish it later.
Okay, we're just gonna start
We'll just
from
start.
scratch.
We'll just start. I'll be good.
All
This
right.
one's-
Mina Wahab here, and today we are sitting with University of Santa Barbara, California professor Dr. Butch Ware.
Pleasure to be with you, Mina.
So great to have you here. You're running for governor. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of why you're running for governor, tell me a little bit about yourself and your expertise as a UC Santa Barbara professor. What do you teach?
I teach African history, Islamic history, Black liberation history, some African American history. I basically teach the history of anti-imperialism and anti-colonial resistance. And I am a scholar that's taught those fields for 22 years now. First at Northwestern University for 4 years, 10 years at the University of Michigan, and now 8 at UC Santa Barbara.
How did you get into that?
You know, I decided when I was 19 years old that I really, really wanted to teach the history of my people. It was something that I felt like had been hidden from me. My father was a locksmith that had a 6th grade education. And I decided that what I wanted to do with my life was to pursue like history of, you know, my people and my background. So that led me to Africa. I learned to speak an African language fluently, the Wolof language, which I did my PhD research in, as well as the French language fluently, which is the archival language, the colonial language in Senegal, and then Arabic for my textual research. So I kind of, you know, made myself into a scholar that could teach about the history of the Black world, but also how it connects with the history of the whole world, right? The history of resistance to enslavement and the slave trade. And so those histories have taken me from West Africa to the US South, to the history of the Middle East. And I'm one of the scholars that's most widely cited actually in all of those fields.
Why is higher education important to you?
Education gave me everything. I mean, like, it's hard for me to describe the kind of abject poverty that I grew up in. We never lived at the same street address for a calendar year consecutively until I turned 9. And when I think about what it has been that's allowed me to, you know, to have any kind of success, it's been education. It's been the fact that I was addicted to books. And really, really, you know, love like escaping into the world of scholarship, and then found that I was also an effective teacher at a relatively young age. Like I started leading reading circles when I was like 19 years old. And so yeah, doing the PhD and then teaching for these decades has really been like gratifying and fulfilling for me. I feel like education is the beginning of everything.
Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What was your childhood
I
like?
grew up in Washington, D.C. originally, and then moved to the south side of Minneapolis for junior high and high school. Actually lived a block away from where Alex Preddy was murdered by ICE not too long ago. So I flew back to Minneapolis right after that happened. And, you know, I would say that I grew up, you know, in 2 very different places. Washington, D.C. back at that point in time was Chocolate City. It was like 92% Black. And then I moved to Minneapolis, which was decidedly not 2% Black, but it was a working class neighborhood on the south side that had everybody in it. Big indigenous population. Minnesota has a lot of Native Americans, so some of my best friends actually lived in Little Earth housing projects, which is, as far as I know, the only indigenous, you know, public housing in the United States off reservation. And it was just a mixed working class neighborhood, Black kids, white kids, Asian kids, indigenous kids, and I feel like I got like a broad exposure to a lot of different backgrounds and experiences in the communities that I grew up in.
What was, you know, child Butch Ware like? I mean, what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, okay, so I only ever wanted to be 2 things when I grew up, and it was not a history professor. I wanted to be either a baseball player or an MC. So my first writing was not academic books. It wasn't Cambridge World History of Slavery, which I've been published in twice. It wasn't the academic books that I've written. It was writing rhymes in my notebooks. You know, I remember buying Rapper's Delight with money that I took out of my mom's purse when I was 7 years old. I literally like could barely see over the counter and was buying a rap album. So hip hop was a huge part of me, you know, growing up, big part of my journey. And then I was an athlete. I played baseball, football, and basketball in high school, but baseball was the game that I loved the most and the one that I was best at. I was throwing 90, 91 miles an hour by the time I was 17 years old. And I actually ended up getting a baseball scholarship. That's how I got into college in the first place.
What was your disposition like? Were you always this vocal? Were you a shy kid? Were you outspoken?
No, super extroverted. From the beginning. My dad, would talk about like how much I would talk. So I've always been this way, very verbose, outgoing personality overall. And I feel like I process a lot of things, through talking about them in the world and in relationship with people, in communication with people. And so I feel like I've always like learned about the world in conversation, even in my academic work. So I did a lot of archival work in multiple languages, but I did hundreds of hours of oral history interviews because I always feel like I learn more in interactions with human beings than with dead letters on a page.
So you were almost kind of like an anthropologist growing up.
Definitely, 100%. And I feel like I kind of had to be because I was always changing schools. So I was always the new kid. I was always trying to figure things out. I always had to kind of figure out where I was, what the environment was like, what the community was like there. And then, kind of teach people who I am, right? And I was having to do this, regularly. So in certain ways, learning how to present myself to public audiences is something I've been doing for a long time, and very different kinds of audiences, right? Ranging from, like folks from working class backgrounds to elite backgrounds. A story that I don't tell very often is that when I was in 5th grade, actually, we were, in that working class neighborhood that I described on the south side of Minneapolis, but my mom took me out to Blake Academy in the suburban Twin Cities, which was like the most expensive elite private school. And I took a test one day, and then they gave me a free tuition, full scholarship to go to the school. So I went from being surrounded by my friends and my community to essentially being surrounded by. So for example, Donaldson's was the equivalent of Macy's as a department store in the Twin Cities back then. Brett Donaldson was one of my classmates. Bediner Jewelers was the most famous jewelry store in the Twin Cities at that time. Debbie Bediner was a classmate of mine. So here I am, son of a locksmith with a 6th grade education and a teenage mom. My mom was 15 when she was pregnant with me, and learning how to be able to speak my truth, live as myself, let people know who I am, that I'm not the stereotype that you might have about me. That's kind of been a lifelong commitment of mine, because if you don't tell your own story, who's going to tell it for you?
Did you ever feel like the black sheep? I mean, you say that you...
Literally the black sheep. Mina, I was the only black kid at Blake Academy the first year that I was there, the only one. And I mean, I'll be blunt about this. They called me the N-word like it was my first name. And I had to fight like on a weekly, if not daily basis for a long time. And after 2 years at that school, I begged my mom to take me back to public school in the city. And I remember her crying, because from her standpoint, this had to look like this great educational opportunity. But for me, the class and racial dynamics made it just deeply traumatic. I mean, I was bullied on a regular basis, consistently.
How old were you?
I started school at age 4, so 5th grade, I would have been, something like 10 years old. I was 10 and 11, going through this. Maybe 12 by the time I was finishing up at Blake. So yeah, and those experiences mark you, because you start to understand, like what's beneath the surface for certain people, right? And sadly, like we've learned that a lot of that racial trauma in U.S. history is still unprocessed. Like I tell people all the time that, so my mother is a white woman. She was 15 years old, pregnant with me, and she was actually told by her high school guidance counselor to abort the child because she was pregnant by a black man. She was told that she would be strung out on heroin and turning tricks by the time she was 17 if she had the baby. That baby was me, right? So white supremacy is literally like trying to take me out before I even got here. And my grandfathers, both of them, on my mother's side and my father's side, they both are veterans. They were, God rest both their souls. So I have one black grandfather that served in the U.S. military, and I have one white grandfather that served in the U.S. military. Guess which side of my family is buried at Arlington National, right?
Yeah.
And guess which side isn't? So I learned, about some of the basic realities of America. And then I also learned that there were good people everywhere that I went. There were people that were trapped by the systems and the conditioning that they had come up in, and they had good hearts. They just didn't know a better way of doing things than the way that we're doing things. And so I think that already by the time I was 14, 15 years old, I was thinking about how can we make this place a better place for all of us that come from different kind of backgrounds, and how can we make this a place that's equitable and just and fair, because I've always had an acutely tuned sense of injustice and unfairness. I just respond viscerally to unfair treatment of anybody, discrimination, oppression. Those things keep me up at night.
How do you deal with that as a kid? I mean, you're being called the N-word by someone who's only 10 years old, so they had to have learned it from somewhere. I mean, no 10-year-old just knows that word.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I was an angry little kid a lot of the time because of that. And I wanted to just, kind of be back in an environment that felt safer for me. I feel like where things really started to shift for me, in terms of making sense of things, was when I was 15. And when I was 15, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that book changed my whole life. I read it cover to cover in one night. I could not put it down. And Malcolm described a lot of the same kind of racial trauma and class trauma that I had experienced. And here was this glorious story of a person who was born into poverty, his father killed by Klansmen, his mother driven to madness by the fact that the insurance companies would not pay the claim, so she's destitute, trying to take care of kids after her husband has been murdered. Malcolm ends up in foster care, drug user, drug dealer, and I felt like if God could bring Malcolm out of what Malcolm was in and turn him into this internationally respected figure, then God could do anything. So I really literally went out the next day and I checked out an English translation of the Quran. I hadn't slept. I checked out an English translation of the Quran. I read that cover to cover the next night, and I converted to Islam before the week was out. And that was the beginning of my journey inside, my faith as a Muslim, but it was also the beginning of my journey inside the Black liberation tradition. And so the Black liberation tradition really helped me to make sense of a lot of that unprocessed trauma. And what I found with Malcolm, because I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Malcolm X. People aren't taught about him. They're taught about King, but they're not taught about Malcolm. But Malcolm and King, at the end of their lives, were very, very similar. They both had this message that was rooted in their faith traditions and their spirituality. One is a Christian, the other is a Muslim, that provided a transcendent narrative for spiritual redemption that was possible for all humanity, both oppressed and oppressor. That they were making this universal call that we can do better than this as a society. And in an interview for the Saturday Evening Post in 1964, Malcolm said, "I just want to be remembered as somebody that tried to warn the people of his country about what would happen if we didn't do better than what we're doing now," right? And in the end, I feel like in all the different iterations of my life as an organizer and as an activist and as a scholar and as a public intellectual, I've sort of been trying to live up to the role model that Malcolm was for me. And a lot of times when I'm trying to process things politically or socially, I sort of look back and ask, what did Malcolm do under similar circumstances? And that often, almost always actually provides, really, really important illumination on the moments that we're in right now.
There was a difference between, Dr. King and Malcolm X. I mean, Dr. King really preached nonviolent protest, really this idea of dialogue versus I feel like Malcolm X was more of this, what I think definitely feels more Muslim in the sense that it's very much an eye for an eye. Like justice isn't turning the other cheek. Justice is an eye for an eye and not asking your oppressor for your freedom, but grabbing your freedom.
For yourself.
And so it's really interesting to me that you resonate more with Malcolm X as opposed to Dr. King, right?
Well, but I think that there was more similarity than people really realize, especially as their paths converged towards the end of their lives. I mean, King was, a partisan of nonviolent direct action. I never considered King somebody that did nonviolent protest. He did direct action, but they did boycotts, they did divestment, they brought people into the gears of the machine to stop the machine from turning over. They didn't just protest because protest is telling your oppressor that you don't like it, and the thing is they already know that's why they're doing it. So protest doesn't do anything. And so King did nonviolent direct action. Malcolm was known for being a partisan of the Black self-defense tradition, but Malcolm was never involved in any kind of violence, altercations of any kind. All he ever said was that a community has a responsibility to provide for their own self-defense, especially if you live inside a state that will not only not protect you from lynchings and from police violence, but will actually carry out violence against you. Then it's your responsibility morally to protect yourself. And Malcolm wasn't alone in this. Fannie Lou Hamer, a Black Democrat civil rights activist in the 60s, she said, "I don't worry about anybody burning a cross on my lawn." She said, "because I keep a loaded shotgun in every room." And she said, and if anybody wants to burn a cross on my lawn, they ain't never gonna write their mama again. So the Black self-defense tradition is not an aggressive or violent tradition. It's just a simple tradition that says that we as Black people have the same right to defend ourselves that any American or any human being has, and especially in a state that has taken our lives cheap, then we have not just a right to do that, but we have a responsibility to do that.
And violence isn't always direct. I mean, I think people, when they hear the word violence, they think of like an active, aggressor in a situation. I mean, sometimes these things are...
Systemic violence is violence, right? When a healthcare company denies 1,000 claims, for cancer treatment because it will improve their bottom line, they have killed 1,000 people with the stroke of a pen. And that, for some reason, isn't described as violence in our system. But if an unnamed shooter, because again, I don't know that Luigi Mangione did anything, but an unnamed shooter, an unidentified shooter, murders a healthcare executive in downtown Manhattan, that is easily understood and marked as a violent act. But how many lives are being cost by the system itself? How many people are losing their lives and their livelihoods with anonymous systemic violence? And that was something that King and Malcolm both focused on. They talked about poverty as a form of violence. They talked about not just the dramatic incidents of lynching and racialized violence, but the ordinary, routine, daily oppression as being forms of violence, economic violence.
So all of these people informed the person that you are today. Definitely. And you grew up around a lot of diversity, but you also had your own struggles with feeling like the black sheep at times.
Sure.
And then talk me through this, this big move to Santa Barbara, because I need you to fill in the gaps. You came to Santa Barbara, became a professor, you had taught at Northwestern before.
Yep, and Michigan.
You came to a place that really isn't that diverse.
Yeah,
What's the experience been like as a professor?
I love UCSB. So the first thing I'll just say is that it was love at first sight. I came out here for a conference just to give a paper. And I'll confess that I did not know there was a UCSB before I was invited to give this lecture. I knew Berkeley, I knew UCLA, and a couple other schools. And when I drove up from LA, because I was visiting a friend, and I hit that stretch of Ventura Freeway, and I was just riding next to the ocean, I was like, this is the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. And then I drove onto campus, and going through Henley's Gate and looking at the beach to my left and the mountain to my right, and this beautiful campus that has 4 beaches on it. And I thought to myself, this is somebody's commute to work every day. And I said out loud, even though I was by myself in the car, I said, what have I done with my life? The beauty of it is that it was love at first sight for me, but the history department at UCSB, which had invited me to give a lecture, there was no job. They weren't hiring. It wasn't an interview. I was just there to give a talk. But I made such an impact with my 20-minute lecture that they started asking questions at dinner about whether I might be movable or not. And next thing I knew, a couple of weeks later, the department was having special meetings and they created an ad hoc committee and made an appeal to the dean to do this special hire to go get this faculty member from Michigan, which is a top 5 history department, and to come to UC Santa Barbara. And so this place that I had fallen in love with at first sight became my home, like almost overnight. And it's hard for me to describe like how much I love this place. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and yeah, there's not as many black people as there are in the places that I grew up. I spend a lot of time with the community, especially in Oakland and in Los Angeles and in San Diego. I still have plenty of time to engage with my community, but I've also this is a major Latino serving institution, and I've found such camaraderie with my Mexican American students. They love the Black revolutionary history that I teach. And I married a Mexican American woman when I moved here, and that's been a whole nother re-education in terms of what it's like to live as a person of color in the United States and in the state of California. And so, yeah, this is 100% home, and I love it here. And let me be clear, yeah, I'm running to win, the gubernatorial race. Sacramento is where I will work, but Santa Barbara is always going to be where I live if I have anything to say about it. It's home, and it's been home, ever since I first laid eyes on it.
Now I do want to get into, obviously, the whole reason why we're here today, which is the fact that you are running for governor of California.
Yeah.
Why do you want to be governor?
Because the people of this state are in desperate need of elected officials that work for them rather than for corporations and billionaires. That's the fundamental reason. The state of California has the 3rd largest economy on the planet after China and Germany. If you split the US into 50 independent states, the list of the biggest economies in the world is China, Germany, California. 4 trillion plus GDP, twice Texas, which is the 2nd highest state, right? So it's this massive engine of wealth, except we have the highest wealth inequality of any state in the union. And we are tied with Louisiana for the highest levels of pure poverty of any state in the union. So California is this beautiful place, and Santa Barbara, I love Santa Barbara, but people that are watching this, in SLO or Santa Maria love their community too. Watching it in Ventura love their community too. If this catches you, in the Bay or in Humboldt or in LA, you've got a great slice of the universe right where you are too, because California is objectively this beautiful place, but it's not beautiful for everybody. Right? It's not beautiful for the 187,000 people that are sleeping on the streets every night in this state, a state that has 186 billionaires in it. And when I was doing taking food to people at homeless encampments in San Jose, all I could think about when we were doing food distribution, because mutual aid is an important part of everything that I've always done. It's not going to change just because I'm running for office. All I could think about was 2 things. I was thinking about the fact that there are 9 families in Silicon Valley that possess $683 billion worth of personal wealth. And I'm doing food distribution within maybe a 20-mile radius of all of them to a homeless encampment. And then I was thinking about the fact that Gavin Newsom filmed himself sweeping homeless encampments, which is throwing away the few meager possessions of the poorest members of our society. And I was thinking about the fact that I faced homelessness as a child, that I slept inside shelters, a battered women's shelter and a regular shelter, and in my dad's locksmith van, and sleeping at relatives' house, and I was unhoused. We were in and out of housing. And then I think about the fact that my dad, for 20 plus years of his life, battled mental health problems and addiction problems and was on and off the street, to where when he was finally clean and sober, me and my brother were able to split the rent 3 ways with my dad with his little benefits check, and he was able to live the last days of his life, in his own apartment. And the thing is that that's what I want for homeless people. I don't want to steal their stuff. I want them to have dignity and homes, because my dad, even though he had faced difficulty and didn't get a lot of opportunity in this world, he was still a human being, and his dignity was still sacred. And every single one of those human beings on the street in the state of California is somebody that, if we had universal health care that was comprehensive of mental health treatment and addiction treatment, if we had housing policies that were designed to give housing first, so that we don't have 14 vacant properties in the city of San Francisco for every homeless person that's sleeping on the street, then you could actually meet the basic needs of everybody in the society. So I'm running because the system is broken, whether your skin is brown or whether your skin is white. The system is broken not because of a divide between the so-called left or the so-called right, but because the people at the top keep pulling more and more out of the people at the bottom. And so we need somebody that doesn't work for those corporations and billionaires to fight for ordinary working class people.
You are a part of the Green Party.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of times these elections pan out and it's red versus blue.
Red versus blue.
And there's no talk of the Green Party.
Yeah.
You're said to be the spoiler in elections. Talk to me about that, because, these ideas to a lot of people sound great on paper.
Yeah.
But then the optics of what needs to be done to get someone in the Green Party elected to a position like governor of a state that has this huge economy and is a world player. I mean, talk to me about all of that. Debunk this idea that you talk about all the time on other podcasts, in other interviews, that's a fallacy. Why is that a fallacy?
So we'll go back to Malcolm, since I've told you what he means to me. Malcolm said the media is the most dangerous institution in the world because it controls how people perceive things. It can have you rooting for the oppressor against the oppressed. So why am I mentioning this? That narrative that the Green Party are somehow spoilers is something that has been entirely produced by corporate media that are owned by the same corporations that contribute to the Democrats and the Republicans. They are the source of that narrative. The real lived experience of voters in California and across the US is completely different. In the last 3 years alone, Greens have won 57% of the elections in which we have stood for office. That's from mayor down to park and rec board, those kind of positions. When they're not able to flood the airwaves with media propaganda, and they're not able to pour money into elections, then Greens beat Team Blue and Red together 57% of the elections. That's a majority of them. So people love the Green Party platform. They love our policies and they love our candidates. And then people get gaslit in every major election into being told that Greens can't win, when Greens win all the time. The Greens are the only third party that consistently win elections nationwide. 1,600 plus elections, won just in recent years. So we win everywhere. But we don't have corporate money to run propaganda on MSNBC or CNN or Fox News. And so instead, people get this narrative that the Green Party just pops up every 4 years to spoil elections. Green Party folks are winning elections all the time, but you're not hearing about them. And the reason is that when people hear about Green Party candidates, it's not just Butch Ware, but there are many, many others. They respond to the message. And the reason is that polling now shows that a full half, 48% technically, of all Americans identify politically as independents. Only 25% identify with Team Blue genocide. Only 25% identify with Team Red fascism. The majority of Americans think that those two parties suck. And that's not me just saying stuff, that's backed by data. polling shows that 63% of registered voters say that those two parties do such a, quote, poor job. That's the language of the polling. I translated it to they suck, but they do such a poor job that we need an independent third party. That number is 53% when it's registered Democrats, 48% when it's registered Republicans, and 70% for independents. So literally 2/3 of us, or almost 2/3 of us, think that these two parties, these two corporate parties, are trash, and that they stage a fake culture war between blue and red, so-called left and so-called right, when both of their policies are extremist policies. They're warmongers across the board. They are all owned by weapons manufacturers. They're all owned by special interests like AIPAC and other special interests. And Americans are fed up with it, and yet, because the media keeps pushing a narrative that Greens can't win, despite the fact that Greens objectively win all the time, people nonetheless talk themselves out of voting for the candidates that best serve their interests and that best give them the policies that will ameliorate, like, the affordability crisis, the healthcare crisis. So part of the reason why I cherish the opportunity to make this case, in local news, with an independent journalist who wants a comprehensive view of the picture, is that I already know how people respond when we make the case. The things that we're running on are 70-30, 80-20 issues for California voters, right? I know what the response to the policies is going to be.
What does that mean? It's a 70-30, 80-20
It
issue?
means a 70-30, 80-20 issue means that 70% of the people in the state are for a thing. 80% of the people are for it and only 20 against it. So 70-30, 80-20 issues in the state of California, for example, universal single-payer healthcare. Nobody thinks that we should be giving a full third of every dollar that we spend on healthcare to healthcare companies whose job it is to deny us care and coverage. They instead think that we should just take that middleman corporation class out of the equation altogether and just pay directly our taxes into the state and get healthcare from the state, single payer. So we have right now the money to pay for a single-payer healthcare system where you would have no copays, no deductibles, no nonsense, and anybody that is sick could receive care immediately just by paying what we pay now, because 70 cents on every healthcare dollar in the state that is spent right now is actually already spent by taxpayers, and 30 cents on every dollar goes to the middlemen, insurance, and healthcare companies. You just get them out of the way, the state becomes the provider of the healthcare, and you can balance the budget right now. That is so obvious and common sense that it is, 3/4 of Californians want that. And Gavin Newsom even ran on this in 2022. And then as soon as he was in power, the healthcare industry put $2.7 million down on the Democrat Party of the state of California, and they never brought universal single-payer healthcare to a floor vote in the state legislature. They actually had passed it twice, I should mention, 2006, 2008. The Democrats passed it because there was a Republican governor, Schwarzenegger, that they knew would veto it. So they could look like they were going for universal health care, but not actually have to betray the donor class that does not want you to have universal health care. The corporations that would be written out of the equation if we were ever to just have a healthcare system that works for us. And then the last part on that, literally we just saw in the recent days, Claudia Sheinbaum, announced the creation of a universal healthcare system in Mexico. Every European country already has this, and now Mexico is going to get the drop on the United States of America in providing healthcare to its citizens. It's laughable. And if we had elected officials that worked for us instead of for those corporations, we would have it. So when I say a 70-30, 80-20 issue, that's the kind of issue that I'm talking about. There's a small minority that doesn't like it, but it's overwhelmingly popular for all the rest of us.
So I have a list of notes here.
Let's go.
Some of the most important issues facing Santa Barbarans as well as Californians in general.
Yep.
Obviously, we have the housing crisis.
Yeah.
Let me let me not wrestle with this. Just to give you an overview, housing crisis, rent control, climate change, infrastructure, safety, and then obviously this idea of what's happening at the federal level and how it's affecting us here at home.
Yep.
So President Donald Trump. when you think about these issues as a whole, affecting
Yeah.
Santa Barbaraans and
Californians.
Californians in general, how do you prioritize this? What are in your opinion, what are the top 3 issues that you will tackle as governor?
I'll give you the top 3, and then with your permission, I'll just give you the top 5, the last 2 that I always add.
Okay, let's do top 5 then.
So it's like a list of your favorite MCs. It's always the top 5. So it's got to be top 5 list. So the first, I already mentioned, universal single-payer healthcare. The second is housing. So the housing crisis.
But wait, before, I don't want to interrupt you. Can you list
Yeah, just give me the list.
Just give me the
Yes,
list
okay,
first,
all
and
right.
then we'll go into it.
Healthcare, housing, human rights, divestment from genocide, and education. Okay? So those are the big 5, and those are all 70, 30, 80, 20 issues for ordinary Californians. Those are our top line items, and they're things that a governor can actually deliver on and fix. So I already talked about the universal single-payer healthcare. That's number 1. Universal single-payer healthcare that is comprehensive of mental health treatment and addiction treatment will obviously help in major ways with the homelessness crisis in the state as well. I'll come back to that. But the first thing that's driving the homelessness crisis is the housing affordability. We know that every time there's a $100 median increase in the average rent, there's a 9% increase in homelessness that follows it. People are being priced out of living. And yeah, gas is expensive because a corrupt Democrat establishment in the state taxes everything 4 and 5 times so that they can pay off their cronies. But gas is not what's driving the affordability crisis in the state of California. Housing is what is driving the affordability crisis. A lot of people are spending their whole paycheck, 70 or 80% of their paycheck, sometimes 100% of their paycheck on housing costs. So the solution to that is simple and straightforward. My policy is called Housing First, and the idea is when you go home for the holidays, everybody eats before anybody gets seconds, right? So Housing First is that same principle except applied to housing. So Blackstone and BlackRock can't have thousands of vacant properties empty while there are hundreds of thousands of people sleeping on the streets at night.
For people who don't know, Blackstone and BlackRock, what does it mean for the...
Yes.
Go ahead. What are these companies?
They're private equity companies that have been buying up single family and also not commercial real estate, but multi-property or multi-unit properties. So Blackstone does more of the single family, BlackRock does more complexes, but they all also buy single family. And what they've been doing in some markets, they bought up 40% of the market, and they keep properties off the market in order to spike the housing costs so that they can manipulate what they get on returns, and then they cook their books and find ways to write this off in another corporation so that they can drive the market up. So this is driving home ownership prices way up so that the average age of the first-time homeowner in 1983 was 31. And last year it was 56. I heard now it's 59, right? That the average age of a home purchaser. So this is terrible, and it's driving both rental and home ownership pricing to where ordinary Californians can't afford this anymore.
So you're saying there is a supply out there, but these
massive
properties...
supply.
So you're saying that there's just all of these vacant properties throughout California?
Yes, all throughout vacant.
What's going on in these properties?
Right, so they're just sitting there because it's good for a few private equity companies to keep them vacant. I already gave this statistic that it's actually 14 vacant properties for every 1 homeless person in the city of San Francisco alone. And those numbers are replicated not just throughout the state of California, but nationwide. And when you hear Democrats and Republicans talk about solving the housing crisis, they keep talking about building more housing. And I'm like, what about the housing that we already have that's just sitting there vacant? Because what I hear is, oh, we're gonna take your tax dollars and give a handout to our developer buddies. That's what they're about to do when they talk about building new housing. So what I want to do instead is I want to tax those private equity companies that are making it so that none of us can afford a place to live. I want to tax them so hard on those vacant properties that they can't wait to sell those back to the state. and that becomes the basis for social housing. And social housing is what they have all over Europe. In a place like Vienna, Austria, for example, 60% of the rental market is actually publicly owned, and it's operated at cost, not for profit, which creates then a price control factor on the private sector, right? Because you've got a public option that is at cost and it's quality. We're not talking about public housing. Like, I grew up in public housing. Those are concrete cages for poor people. This is mixed income housing. It's distributed in a bunch of different neighborhoods. It's all over the place. It's not concentrated in ghettos. It's all over, and it's in different kinds. So social housing has made it so that in Vienna, the average renter pays 25% of their monthly income on rent. Wouldn't that be great inside the state of California? So real quick, I just did the healthcare and the housing. With those two, you take out the two contributing factors to the homelessness crisis, first off, right? And that's not even in my top 5. It's just we incidentally knocked that out in the top 2. Yeah.
How do you tax, Blackstone and BlackRock? I mean, as governor, how would you even accomplish something like that? How do these things become laws?
Yeah, so if I can, I'll give you the whole executive action bundle after I finish the list. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's do
perfect.
That.
Yeah, so because there's a plan for the first 100 days to just knock these things out right away.
Because people always say, we're going to tax the rich, we're going to do this, and then you see people get elected into office, and when it comes to the implementation of these policies, it becomes nearly impossible for it to come to fruition.
And the reason is usually because they belong to one of those two corporate parties, so the impossibility is baked inside the party. It's not actually a practical impossibility. And you can take the example, for example, just to cite a case of Zoran Mamdani introducing this pied-à-terre tax, which is for these luxury complexes, these luxury penthouses in New York City that are vacant. He already did that, right? And he just got into office. Where there's a political will, there is a political way. But where you lack the political will, ain't gonna be no way at all. So these things can be accomplished, and I can tell you about in the first 100 days how we would do that. But let me just finish the 5, and we'll just tackle them all together. So the next one is the human rights piece. And the human rights piece is simple and straightforward, is that it's about protecting the basic rights, dignities, and civil liberties of every single human being inside the state of California, irrespective of their status, irrespective of their gender identity or expression, how they show up in the world. So that means you're protecting LGBTQ+ rights, you're protecting trans rights, and you're protecting immigrant rights, because you're protecting everyone's rights. Human rights are for human beings. So with respect to especially immigrant communities, it means that as governor of the state of California, I'm not complying with any unconstitutional federal orders, which means that ICE is going to have to go through every lawyer and law enforcement officer in the state before they touch so much of the hair on the head of any California resident. We have that within our capacity and power right now, but the Democrats do not want to use it because it would alienate their donor base. Right now, the Democrats could be protecting communities from ICE inside the state, but it is too politically costly for them to do so. So instead, you see police departments and sheriff's departments running cover and carrying water for feds that are kidnapping and abducting Californians. And that has to end. We have to protect, our communities, and we have to protect the rights of everyone.
How do you do that, though? Because you just said that you wouldn't allow these ICE agents to do it, but ICE agents are already doing this.
Right.
So how do you stop them if police is not?
Well, but that's the point. Is so if somebody rolls up on you, Mina Wahab, in a van, wearing a mask and carrying a gun, and refuses to identify themselves, and wants to throw you into a van, aren't the police the people that you should be able to call to protect you from that? But instead, the people that you are supposed to be able to call to protect you from that are coordinating with those federal authorities to find you. That's not their job, and in point of fact, it is illegal for them to do that. So we will prosecute those sheriff's departments and those police departments that are complicit in federal civil rights violations inside the state of California. And again, any sitting governor and attorney general combination could do this right now, but who funds you runs you. And because they have the same corporate puppet masters, they are not going to bite the hand that feeds them. There have been a couple exceptions to this, people that have understood something of the power that is already in the hands of elected officials. The Democrat mayor of Chicago lined up municipal garbage trucks in a circle around the city of Chicago to stop federal agents from infiltrating. That's just the beginning of what a Butch Ware administration would do to protect Californians, because that's my job. I swear an oath on the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of California. I do not swear it on Donald Trump's bald head that he's trying to cover with a toupee. So I'm not going to kowtow to illegal federal extrajudicial kidnappings. So we're going to protect human rights, healthcare, housing, human rights, divestment. The taxpayers in the state of California pay hundreds of millions of dollars to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, 5 weapons manufacturers that receive 60% of the US defense budget, which now, thanks to the Trump unmasking of the realities of American imperialism, is no longer called the Secretary of Defense, it's just the Secretary of War. Call the thing what it is. So our money now just goes to making war. Well, Californians do not want their tax dollars to be used to incinerate children in tents, whether in Gaza or in Iran or in Yemen or anywhere else. We don't want our tax dollars to make us complicit in war crimes. And we know this because whole municipalities and counties have already divested. Alameda divesting from Caterpillar because of its complicity in the genocide in Palestine. We have seen UC campuses with both student and faculty Senate votes divesting not just from the genocide in Gaza, but from the war machine more broadly. But this is a slap in the face of the bipartisan blue and red war machine that runs the national politics. And they are deathly afraid of a Green Party governor that would actually lead public policy and provide moral leadership, saying, as I have said on the record as a UCSB faculty member, that our tuition dollars that we pay for our kids to go to UC schools should not be going to missile manufacturers, period. I don't want the tuition dollar that I pay for my daughter to go to Berkeley to be used to kill somebody else's daughter.
Why is that so controversial?
It's not. We're back again to another 70-30, 80-20 issue. And that's why they're so afraid of a Green Party candidate, because this is across ideology, it's across identity divides, it's for people that think of themselves as leftists, progressives, liberals, centrists, conservative, right wing. None of us want our politicians working as agents of foreign governments in order to prosecute Middle Eastern wars with our money. We do not want our money spent on that, and we do not want the blood of our children spent on that. And you just heard Gavin Newsom saying we may have to consider military conscription in the next year and a half. And people sit there as if we haven't been through drafts in the United States of America, as if this is just idle talk. But that war machine is amping up to not only come for children overseas, but to come for your kids too in California as grist for that mill.
What are your thoughts on military in general? I know you said that both of your grandparents were veterans, and yet you do also have this stance that we need to be divesting from this war machine.
And it is veterans that have led the way in saying that we need to divest from this war machine. Brian McGinnis, I'm hosting an event with Brian McGinnis here in Santa Barbara on Sunday. Divest from occupation, invest in education. That's the name of the event. We are going to be at St. Michael's Church from 2 to 6 on Sunday. Brian McGinnis is the former Marine who said we are not going to war for Israel and had his arm snapped off by a sitting congressperson. He had his arm broken. People don't even realize that that is the Green Party candidate for Senate in the state of North Carolina. people saw this viral moment but don't understand that that viral moment comes from a very specific place. Greg Stoker, former special forces, learned what American imperialism really is during his experience abroad and has become one of the most powerful anti-war voices. He's running as a Green Party candidate for Congress in the state of Texas. This is not just Butch Ware, black radical, running with the Green Party. This is a multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition of people who are saying, we don't want our tax dollars being used for occupying armies, either in California or anywhere else.
Where could those tax dollars go where it could benefit the quality of life for Santa Barbaraans and Californians as a whole?
Which brings us to point 5, education. When development experts and philanthropists are doing evaluations of the best return on investment in developing countries or in developing communities, they will tell you every single time that education is the best way to invest your dollars in a community's development, because every dollar that you spend on education yields $7 of gross domestic product down the line. So what I want us to do with that money that we're no longer using to kill kids is to educate kids. Crazy idea, right? But that goes back to where we started this interview with that education has been everything for me, and it allowed me to come from the most difficult of economic circumstances to a point where I can be a thought leader and a teacher for so many, both in my classroom and in the community as broad. I know that education is the key that unlocks all doors, and I want that same thing for everybody's kid in the state of California. So what does that mean? We subsidize right now billionaires, right? Tesla pays a 0.75% effective tax rate. Elon Musk is worth $800 billion now. I mean, never mind that that's all on paper, not real money, but he's worth $800 billion now because we have been subsidizing all of his businesses with our tax dollars. What if instead of subsidizing people like Tom Steyer and Elon Musk, what if we subsidize public education in Stockton, where my wife, Clementina Aragon, is from? What if we subsidize public education in Compton, where Kendrick Lamar grew up? So that the amount that is spent per pupil in Stockton and in Compton and in Beverly Hills and in Irvine is the same, so that you actually have a level playing field and equal opportunity. What if you had universal pre-K, so that all the kids that were hungry when they went to school, like I was in elementary school, my mom, she used to sit and watch us eat. And then when we were done eating, she would eat what was left. So there were no leftovers to have for dinner or for breakfast before going out to school. Well, what if we have universal pre-K? The Black Panthers did it, right? They gave free hot breakfast to kids. So we can absolutely afford to do this. We can afford to do it right now. So now you've got universal pre-K. You've got the spending gap leveled on a per pupil basis across the state. Equal opportunity for all of our kids, no matter what their skin color, immigration status, ethnic background. Give everybody a fair shot. Because right now, some people born on third base swear to hit a triple. Right? They think that they've had every advantage, and they think that they're just playing the same game. Whereas somebody like me, I had to scratch and claw just to get a turn at bat. And if I strike out in that one turn at bat, it's over for me. Well, what if we just leveled the playing field? And then, how about this part? We used to have free public college in the state of California. Ronald Reagan took it away, and I'm not making it up. You can look it up yourself. I won't give a shout out to Google. You can look it up yourself with a web search. But Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon had conversations that they were concerned that there were too many educated black and brown people being produced by the public education system in the state of California, and that might lead to political uprising against the system. So they got rid of a thing that benefited everybody, including working class white people, just because it helped them more effectively racially oppress minority groups. Well, the Democrats could have gotten that back for us at any point in time since the 70s. How come they ain't do it? Because they're not interested in leveling that playing field any more than the Republicans were interested in leveling that playing field. we can level that playing field. So imagine now not having a mountain of student loan debt. Because you know who doesn't have student loan debt? Rich kids. Their parents can afford to send them to school. It's just working class kids now that end up with all of this student loan debt, and we are now just paying into these big corporations that are just financing loans. And it used to be that the students, the game plan was go to school, get an education, get a good job, secure the bag. Now the student is the bag. Their loan debt is the bag, and that's got to stop. We can stop it.
A lot of times when things become free and accessible, people will start noticing that the quality becomes worse. How do you ensure that people still have premium quality education when it becomes free? Because I feel like right now we live in a world where there is a tiered system, where if you pay for your kid to go to private school, you're getting, you're paying for the networking that comes with that. You're paying for the perceived sense of safety, and being around kids that come from a similar socioeconomic background. So how do you guarantee, with anything, whether it's healthcare, education, that the quality is still premium because it's free?
This is the easiest question to answer, is that you take the corruption out of the system. The sad part about where our tax dollars are being spent is that right now they are predominantly not being used to actually provide the services that we're paying for. So I'll use the homelessness case as an example that allows me to circle back to the direct answer to your question. $25 billion of our taxpayer dollars spent by the Newsom administration over the last 5 years on homelessness alleviation programs. And the number of homeless people went from 120,000 a night sleeping on the streets to 187,000 a night sleeping on the streets. Well, where did the money go? The money went to developers to build affordable housing, and it went to the poverty industrial complex, the NGOs that write for themselves a $400,000 a year salary for the CEO to run a poverty alleviation program, and then they might help 4 or 5 homeless people. So they're taking our tax dollars and giving it to rich people when we're supposed to be giving it to poor people. So then we have this very real sense that our tax dollars are being wasted. And the Democrats will often say, Republicans are bad because they want to lower taxes. No, I want to lower taxes too, because I don't think that we should be paying for Gavin Newsom to give handouts to his developer buddies. I think we need to take the corruption out of the system, and that's how we ensure the quality. Because right now, and this is something that a governor can do immediately, and this is what they're so afraid of. Inside the state of California, the governor has massive budgetary powers, but especially appointment powers. And right now, the regulators and decision makers over all of those money pots that are buried throughout the state, those are all political appointees whose political allegiance is to the California Democrat structure.
Give me an example. Who are the types of people, if you were governor, that you'd be able to appoint to oversee a certain sector?
We literally, I'll have to think of a specific position, because we identified 2,300 separate regulatory positions throughout the state that you could change out on day one that would have fundamental impact on spending and community life at the community level, like right down to your community center in Santa Barbara. So I'm not thinking of a particular position right off the top. I'm thinking about the structural change that we can bring in within the first 100 days.
First 100 days? You're
yes.
saying that you can create structural change for a system that's been the way it is for decades in just 100 days, in 3 months?
Good, so you allowed me to circle back, because I promised to tell you how we were going to do those 5 things, and I didn't do that. So we're publishing our 100-day plan later this week, but some of them are so simple, they're so easy. So we already know that the votes exist in the state legislature to pass universal single-payer health care in the state, because they were there. That's why they didn't put it to a floor vote, because it would have made the Democrats look bad. But I'm not waiting for the state legislature to pass universal single-payer health care. I'm declaring a public health emergency on day one. And a public health emergency frees up a bunch of state funds that you can then create that universal single-payer healthcare system right from the beginning. What else can you do from day one with that kind of executive authority?
Are we having a public health emergency?
Of course we are. Look at what long COVID is doing in our communities. Look at the maternal death rate for Black and Mexican women inside the state of California. Don't tell me we're not having a public health emergency. People are not going to the doctor because they don't know how they're going to pay for it, and it is leading to massive costs on the back end that ultimately come back to us as taxpayers. We're always footing the bill so that the corporations can cash the check up front. Those days are over, right? So back to another example. PG&E, responsible for 480 wildfires in a single year that were productive of $9 billion in total damages. The Newsom administration wrote those liabilities off with the stroke of a pen. $9 billion. Imagine, I'm a Green Party candidate, and principle number one of the environmental justice movement worldwide is polluters pay. When people destroy the environment, it's their job to pay to fix it, because we all pay those costs in terms of the air that we breathe. And instead, those corporations are just getting a free pass. Well, that is money that is taken right out of our backs. That stops on day one. You asked about Blackstone and BlackRock earlier. Yes, we are going to pass that effective tax rate. We're going to do that same kind of pied-à-terre tax that Mamdani did. But for these cases, for example, certain families like the Resnick family, which controls an insane amount of the water resources in the state of California, and for certain of those Blackstone and BlackRock properties, eminent domain is not off the table. You can just take it as the state, and they can write it off, and that's that. So we are not taking anything off the table if it serves the needs of ordinary working Californians. We can absolutely change these structures in 100 days. You know who knows this, by the way? It's not just Mamdani who's done it, from the so-called left. Trump knows this. Trump knows that none of the rules that people have said that they were going to play by are actually rules. They're simply conventions, a gentleman's agreement agreed on between the two halves of that one corporate party, the red half and the blue half. And they know full well that when they want to actually do the things that they were elected to do, granted, we don't like any of the things that Trump's base elected him to do. That's not the argument that I'm making here. But the point is that executive authority absolutely can be used in effective fashion on behalf of the people. We see two dramatically different examples of that in Trump and Mamdani. And I think that that's what they're afraid of in the state of California. They're not afraid that we'll fail. They know that we will succeed. That's the thing that they're worried about.
So to recap, if I can remember the list of priorities, you talked about healthcare is number one, number two is human rights.
Housing is two.
Oh, housing.
Yep.
Number three is human rights. Number four is divestment. And number five is education.
That's it. That's the top five.
When you address all of these things in each of these buckets, what do you envision that California will look like a year from now?
People are going to call me crazy, but I actually think that we are going to be part of the greening of the United States of America and the greening of California. I think that what we can have is environmental sustainability. I think that we can have prosperity and abundance. I think that this state produces so much more than what we need to fulfill the basic needs of everybody in the state. We talked about that 4 trillion GDP. It's just that right now, it's not just that the wealth isn't being distributed. The wealth is actually being extracted from the bottom and taken up to the top. We are subsidizing the wealthiest people in the society. There's a lot of discourse about immigrants being freeloaders. That's nonsense. Every single study shows that immigrants pay more in taxes and economic benefits than what they take out of the society. And that's not even debatable, even though I know it's a big talking point in some circles. But it is true that there is a tiny minority parasitic class. They're called billionaires. And that's the group that needs to pay their fair share. That's the group that is cashing out without paying in. And if we just had them carry their own weight instead of sucking the blood out of ordinary people, then California can be a place that works for everybody. And I really believe that. Like, I see that in my mind's eye, because I know that we have abundance right now. It's just not fair. It's not shared out fairly. Yeah.
Is there such thing as an ethical billionaire?
No,
I mean,
no.
Why?
Well, because what you need to do in order to become a billionaire, like, Tom Steyer, for example, who's also running for governor in the state of California, is you need to do things like invest in private prisons, which Tom Steyer did for a long time. That allows you to amass massive amounts of wealth. I'll tell you, I do have a close friend who, and I won't name him, but he's a multi-millionaire. And he would have been a billionaire if not for the fact that he refused to lay off his staff during COVID, and he refused to accept the PPP loans from the state. So he was almost to $1 billion, and he lost a massive amount of his wealth because he was ethical, right? So yeah, I think that there are ethical multimillionaires. I know one of them. And by the way, I think California should be a place where you can and should strive to be a millionaire. I think we should have lots and lots of millionaires. And I think it should be really hard on billionaires. Because how many millionaires are in the waiting because of those $683 billion that are in the possession of 9 families in Silicon Valley?
What do you mean, how many millionaires are in the waiting?
That $683 billion in personal wealth is wealth that's outside of the economy and concentrated in a tiny group of people. If they spend it, if they distribute it, if they give some away in charity, then that enters the economy. If that same amount of money was distributed amongst 1,000 multimillionaires, then that would be money that would be operating small businesses, creating employment, creating jobs. The concentration at the top isn't even good for capitalism. It doesn't even work for capitalism, right? It actually is counterproductive. And I want to be clear, I've been an anti-capitalist my whole life, but I am hugely invested in successful commerce. Commerce is what the state of California needs. And the policies that I'm advocating for are not anti-business policies at all. They're anti-corporate policies. What do I mean by that? Universal single-payer healthcare, yes, it's good, it's socially responsible, it allows you to get treatment, all those things. It's also really good for commerce. And the reason is General Motors pays more for its healthcare than for the steel in its vehicles. If you have universal single-payer healthcare, small businesses particularly will be more competitive with respect to large corporations, because small businesses often can't compete because of the difficulty in providing healthcare benefits, right? How many people stay in a bad job just because the benefits are good in that bad job? So now we have more labor mobility, we have stronger small businesses compared to large corporations, and even those large corporations, which are now going to be subject to some basic monopoly regulations, even those large corporations are going to have it be a positive impact on their bottom line, because they're no longer going to have to spend all of their money on healthcare either. Last point on that. This is not just good for businesses and commerce, but it's also good for organizers and for labor unions, because right now labor unions spend most of their time negotiating healthcare and benefits, whereas if that was already taken care of, then you would be spending your time negotiating for better wages and working conditions. If the state just did a few small things that were more rational and more sensible to create a level playing field for people, then people could do what they're there to do. And that's the thing about the Green Party, is that the Democrats and the Republicans, low-key, both love to centralize things. Green Party is completely about decentralized democracy. Every single community's politics, should be locally driven. Your needs and concerns in your rural community in Humboldt County and in an urban neighborhood in Los Angeles might not be the same, but we want things like proportional representation, multi-member district, ranked choice voting. We want
A people-powered movement.
A people-powered movement with all different kinds of people. And if you go to butchwareforgov.com, at the bottom of every page, it says solidarity beyond identity and ideology. I don't care who you pray with. I don't care who you lay with. None of that's any of my business. It's government's job to meet the basic needs of every single person in the society and to create a just and equitable environment so that people can be successful and thrive.
And just to be clear, when you say you're anti-capitalist, you're not anti-competition, right?
Not at all. No,
okay.
no. Capitalism...
Because people will say capitalism drives innovation, it drives competition.
No.
And a lot of times, progressives get a bad rap. They're like, well, socialism means everyone gets a handout. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the differences between...
Capitalism means billionaires get the handouts. Socialism means that the basic needs of ordinary people are met. And just to be clear, I've never identified myself as a socialist. I've always identified myself as an anti-capitalist because I'm a historian and I know where capitalism comes from. Capitalism was created by the European slave trade in Africans. Capitalism was created through the genocide of indigenous populations. Capitalism was designed to extract wealth and resources out of indigenous lands and enslaved black bodies. That is a completely different thing from commerce. I'm a huge fan of thriving business. But business is when the workers and the people that are invested in an enterprise actually see the benefits of their labor. Capitalism is when the ownership class extracts all of the value out of ordinary working people and it goes up. Capitalism...
Trickle up theory.
Trickle up theory. Well,
the opposite of Reaganomics.
If you want to understand what capitalism is, understand that it's when Jeff Bezos can blast himself into space on a phallic symbol penis rocket while his employees at Amazon are peeing in bottles because they can't take a 15-minute break from their Amazon deliveries. That's capitalism. Capitalism is when Elon Musk has $800 billion and we subsidized all the R&D for Tesla. That's not right. We paid for that. So capitalism is just socialism except for rich people. And I'm not wedded to any of the labels or ideologies because a lot of my anti-capitalist heroes were not Marxists. They were people that were born 100 years before Marx was a glint in his daddy's eye. I am not somebody that makes doctrinal commitments. I don't swear an oath on Capital by Karl Marx. I try to solve problems for ordinary working people with whatever tools most effectively solve problems for ordinary working people.
And I know we've been talking for a while.
That's okay.
I'm gonna look at the time just to make sure. Oh my goodness.
What time is
it's literally been an hour and a half conversation.
Yeah, I'll have to pick up my son soon. Yeah.
By the way, I didn't think it was gonna go this long. But and we're gonna wrap up soon, but I do wanna also touch on this idea, you're a political outsider.
Yep.
Why would people vote for a political outsider? You have no experience in politics.
People want a political outsider, frankly, and people want qualifications, not experience inside a corrupt system. I got a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and I taught at the top research institutions. I've run multinational research collectives across 4 continents. I was doing that when I was 30 years old as a first-year assistant professor. What people want is people who do not have established commitments to an already corrupt system. Because what experience means inside the current system is that you've sold out already. Experience in the current system means that you owe someone a favor. Experience in the current system means that when you're in power, you're going to pay back those debts to your donors, you're going to pay back those debts to the corporations that put you in power, and you are not going to hire the most qualified person to be the regulatory authority over that particular domain. You are going to do a favor to the political machinery that brought you there. Political outsider is exactly what's needed in this moment because the people on the inside of the political machinery have shown us exactly what they're made of.
Do you think you're going to win the governor's race?
Absolutely, and they are deathly afraid of it because as recently as 3 weeks ago, I was polling just 5 points off of the top Democrat candidates. that's when this effort to knock me off the ballot began. We know that in a jungle primary where only the top 2 candidates advance, it's only going to take 13 to 14% of the vote. That's going to be about 1.2 million votes by June 2nd. There are 1 million Muslims in the state of California, and 53% of American Muslims already voted for me in the 2024 presidential election. We expect much higher turnout from the Muslim community, but we also expect a lot of working class people from a bunch of different backgrounds. And we have built a political organization from San Diego to Humboldt, Central Coast, Central Valley. We're in every county in the state. And the time is right for the meeting of this movement with the moment. Last thing I'll say on that is that the Green movement is not just a US movement. We saw in the UK just recently the Greens win 1 congressional election, and the Green Party went past the Reform and Labor parties in national public opinion polls. People are ready for another alternative because it's just been Democrats and Republicans banging on each other for the last 130 years, and the people have been in the breach the whole time. None of us have been served by it. It's time for a new day.
What I think is interesting, particularly about this governor's race, is that you have only 2 candidates for Republican.
Yep.
And when it comes to the Democrats, it's very saturated.
Sure.
There's so many people running for governor under the Democratic umbrella. Yep. And so with just the way things are looking right now, there is no clear front runner on Team Blue.
Yep.
And I know Green Party is separate from that, but ultimately, Green Party is closer to Team Blue than they are to Team Red, although... That's
what people think, but we were getting more voters from Team Red in the 2024 presidential election, at least in the last 2 polls before the election day. Here's what I'll say, is that Team Blue is a mess, and let me be clear about this. I think that the Democrat Party, as we know it, died in Gaza. I think that the massive unpopularity of the genocide really eroded the Democrats' electoral base, and it revealed to a lot of people that this is just a corporate imperialist party that is every bit as murderous when it comes right down to it as the Republicans are. And I think that ordinary people just don't want any part of that anymore. And so that's why they're so afraid, especially on the Democrat side. The Republicans, sure, they're terrible, but at least they know who they are. They know who they serve. The Democrats are trying to pretend like they can serve the interests of the working class while they actually work for the ruling class. And that is not tenable. And so what they're afraid of in my candidacy is that I expose the fact that when it comes right down to it, those are 2 parties that differ in the external optics of how they operate, but when it comes to their policies and it comes to their donor class, they work for the same people and they produce the same outcomes.
It sounds very much the way you're describing it is like, stab me in the front, don't stab me in the back.
Pretty much.
But at the end of the day, you're still getting stabbed.
You're still getting stabbed. And you know what? Californians are just tired of being stabbed. How about just don't stab me? How about instead of spending all of your money on knives, spend some of it on agricultural implements instead so that we can grow things, right? Why are we spending all of our money on weapons that we either use on our own population or on populations abroad when we could instead be using it on education, agricultural productivity, investment in technology, and so forth?
What kind of campaigning are you doing? Because I feel like when you look at the people who are, going for governor, if I go on social media, I look at your fan base and they're extremely loyal. People are like, what are we going to do to make sure we get Butch on the ballot? If he's not on the ballot, we're going to do a write-in. I get the vibe that they're extremely loyal, just looking through, this whole range of comments. But if I turn on my TV, I'm seeing ads for Tom Steyer. I'm seeing ads
Tom
for...
Steyer spent $40 million on YouTube ads. I mean, just imagine. So 90% of Americans think that elections should not be decided by the highest bidder, but right now 92% of American elections go to the candidate that spends the most on them. You shouldn't be able to buy elections. Sorry to interrupt.
How do you get the exposure that all of these other candidates are getting? I mean, you're saying that you think you're going to win.
Yeah.
How do you even stand a chance when the exposure that you're getting is very different from the exposure that Democrats and Republicans are getting in this race, when it comes to media coverage, when it comes to any sort of platform, other than the digital space? I mean, on the digital space, you're set.
Sure.
So what are you going to do about that inequity when it comes to coverage.
Yeah, that's why I said what I said about Malcolm saying the media is the most powerful, instrument. It'll change people's perceptions and opinions. But let me just be clear. We're not going to be able to fix that problem in this election. We win this election, that problem's done. We're just going to have publicly financed elections. You're not going to be able to buy elections anymore. Most European elections, each party that gets a certain number of signatures gets the same amount of airtime, and it's decided on candidate quality and policy. Instead, here, billionaires think that they can just buy elections because they can. Green Party wins one election in the state of California, and that is over with. But in the meantime, we're going to win anyway, because even with Tom Steyer spending $38 million, he still couldn't open up a 6-point lead on me with us spending $500,000 in the same time frame. And the reason is that they can have all the money in the world, but we have the people on the ground. You go into every community in this state, and I've been in every county virtually. I think there's like 3 counties that we haven't been to yet. It's a big state. We've done our best. And you see the same desire everywhere for an alternative to this crooked, corrupt system. So we're building it block by block, and it shows up on social media because it's happening in real life. It doesn't show up in mainstream media because the mainstream corporate media is deathly afraid of what we are building. And we're building it anyway. And the people are not going to be stopped. I was inspired by Malcolm X. The Panthers, an Oakland organization, were also inspired by Malcolm X. And Huey P. Newton would always say, all power to the people, because all power really is in the people. The elected officials are using it on loan from us, and we're seeing all throughout the state of California that the people are ready to take it back.
I'm so glad that the people who are going to be watching this will get a sense of not only the fact that you talked about your policies, but they also will have an understanding of who you are as a person, how you grew up, your background as an academic, the importance of education. I think people will have a firm understanding of where you stand on a lot of these issues. Yeah. I'm just going to refer back to this.
Sure, and let me just look at the time.
Because I know.
Not late to get my son.
Okay, we'll leave soon. We talked about virtually everything. We talked about ICE, we didn't talk a lot about climate change. I know.
We can talk about climate change if you like.
I think the reason why that is important, a lot of Tom Steyer specifically, he's a climate activist, and I know Santa Barbara is the birthplace of Earth Day.
Yeah.
We also have a huge controversial, oil pipeline issue with Sable Offshore, what's going on with the Trump administration, what's going on, here locally, and even at the state level. What's your position on the environment, on things that are happening locally here in Santa Barbara County, like, the restarting of this corroded pipeline that burst during the Refugio oil spill? Because a lot of people here, you talk to people here in Santa Barbara, what do you care about? Yes, it's cost of living. Yeah. Yes, it's housing. Yes, it's healthcare.
It's a beautiful environment. We want to keep it that way, right? I mean, so let's just start with the fact that I am the Green Party candidate after all, and the Green Party is founded on environmental justice above all. This is the only planet that we have, and we have to take care of it. My own campaign is rooted not just in principles of international ecological preservation, but also in concepts of indigenous land stewardship and sustainability. Those are the ideas and ideals that have been driving my politics since I was a kid, because my political mentor, Annie Young, the mother of my best friend, was an indigenous woman who was the first ever Green Party elected official in the state of Minnesota, serving from 1989 to 2018. And so for me, environmental sustainability and stewardship is always at the core of everything we do. And let's just go back to the pipeline. We, as the United States of America, have to wean ourselves off of the addiction to fossil fuels, and California, as the most progressive state, is going to have to lead the way in that. The Middle Eastern wars that we need to divest from are driven by our addiction to oil and control over the oil. And it's massively wasteful, not just in terms of human life, but it's destructive to the environment. 37% of all of the petroleum that is consumed is used just to ship petroleum to other places. make it make sense. That's not sustainable. It's a kind of mental illness when in the final analysis. So we need to lead the way in guiding people away from this fossil fuel addiction. And there's not enough lithium in the planet to replace all of the personal vehicles on the road that run on gas now with batteries. And we have seen that the extraction for coltan and cobalt and copper from places like the Congo is every bit as brutal and violent as the extraction of oil from places like the Middle East. So yes, we need cleaner sources of energy, but electric batteries and personal electric vehicles is not going to solve the problem. Believe it or not, Tesla has not fixed right, the ecological crisis. So what we need is clean, high-speed rail to connect the state from north to south and into the inland, and we need free, clean public transportation in all of our major cities. We need to be able to get around the way that they do in other wealthy countries without all of the reliance on personal vehicles. And don't get me wrong, I love California car culture, and I'm not giving up my truck, but I'm happy to be able to hop on a train to get to San Diego for campaign events rather than having to get into my own vehicle. So we need innovative solutions to the climate crisis that are rooted in providing sustainability. I talked about indigenous conceptions of stewardship. What that means is that you are not only thinking about your responsibility to 7 generations of ancestors that preceded you, but 7 generations of progeny that will succeed you after you're gone. And we are destroying the environment even for our own children. That's got to stop. California can lead the way. And why not start that in a place like Santa Barbara, where Earth Day got started, where people are surrounded by the most stunningly beautiful natural environment and are absolutely right and justified in wanting to preserve it.
Okay. So I checked my notes again. We've pretty much touched everything that you can touch on. I mean, we talked about housing, climate crisis, transportation with the high-speed rail idea, education, obviously, healthcare.
Free daycare, we didn't talk about that.
We didn't talk about that, but I know that that's something
it's a policy,
that Zoran Mamdani
has already done.
Yeah.
And New Mexico has actually already done this on a statewide level, so it can absolutely be done.
What would that do?
So a couple of things. Free daycare makes a massive difference in terms of the gender imbalance in pay and in other things. When combined with telework and remote work, and this is another place where the Newsom administration has been really brutal. They forced people back into offices. But if you are able to have state-provided daycare, and if you are able to, whenever possible, integrate telework with in-person work, that keeps people off of the roads, it keeps those emissions from going into the environment, it lowers childcare costs for the state, which would be picking up a lot of the bill for childcare going forward, and it essentially helps to create a more equitable environment for women who, let's face it, carry most of the hidden labor and the hidden costs of childcare, and it's often the thing that stands in the way of women's economic empowerment and achievement in the workplace. So that's also part of how we deliver gender equity as well. So yeah, we want free daycare as well as transportation, no doubt.
Final 2 questions, and I promise I'll be done with this. What's something about you that most people don't know?
I don't know if most people don't know it at this point, but I would say I lift crazy heavy. I've always been an athlete my whole life. I mentioned that I play baseball, but at age 50, a year and a half ago, I hit 225-pound bench press for 30 repetitions, which is like NFL combine for defensive tackles. I hit a 405 squat set for 17 reps, so that's 4 plates per side squat for 17 reps. I'm an athlete, and I believe in like a holistic approach to health and wellness. And I believe that the way that we show up in community is related to our physical health and our strength, and that whatever our age or disability status or gender, that we can find out who we are as a person by kind of testing our limits physically, and that means different things for different people. But yeah, you mentioned competition before. I'm super competitive because I grew up in a sports environment. I don't like losing at anything, and I ain't trying to lose at this.
Okay, and final question for you. Describe what governor you would be using 3 adjectives.
Compassionate, visionary, and healing. Yeah. The state needs healing, and its people need compassion, and we need vision that allows us to see past where we are right now.
There you have it, Dr. Butch Ware, UC Santa Barbara professor, and possibly our next governor. We'll find out.
Yep, and don't miss Sunday's event, St. Michael's University Church, 6586 Picasso, from 2 to 6.
Thanks so much for joining me for an extended conversation.
Always a pleasure.
Longest interview I've ever done.
Yeah, and the matching green is going to make it visually appealing.
This was great. This
Awesome.
was unplanned, you guys. Thanks,
All right.
Butch.
Thank you, Mina. Appreciate it. All right, I got to go get my son. I'll let you guys do the SD cards, and then Jeremy just